This is a story I experienced firsthand while working as a teaching assistant at a national university in the Kanto region. Since then, I've quit that job and moved on to something else, because when things like this happen in the world, everything tends to go wrong. I'm going to tell you a story so oppressive, just recalling it feels suffocating. Here's how it went. In the research lab where I worked, one room was being used as a storage closet for some unknown reason. At a national university, the size of each research lab was fixed, so using that limited space as a storage room was already strange. According to the professor, staff and students who worked in that room kept encountering bad incidents. You might think that's absurd in a lab doing cutting-edge science, but the professor said ever since that room was used as a lab, ominous things happened repeatedly. At first, a graduate student conducting experiments from that room suddenly jumped out, shouting words nobody could understand, and left no suicide note. Then, a young technician working late into the night died mysteriously inside the same room. Before his death, he had written strange, incomprehensible things in his lab notebook. Although the death was ruled accidental after an autopsy, it was suspected that he died of a sudden illness. There were many other strange occurrences after that, so eventually, the room that should have been a lab was repurposed as storage. But even as a storage room, it was eerie. Sometimes, when nobody was inside, the fire alarm would go off for no reason, or the fluorescent lights hanging from the ceiling would flicker and sway. When I started working there, the lab introduced a high-newness and scanning electron microscope. The lab space was cramped, there was no place to put it except that room. I didn't believe in anything supernatural or mysterious, so I casually set up the microscope in that room and began experiments. I assigned the task of observing synthetic fibers under the electron microscope to the graduate students, telling them to do it late at night. The noise level is low at night, so you can capture clearer, nicer images. But even in the world of advanced science, strange things can happen. One night, a bleary-eyed graduate student came to me with a terrified expression. I went back to the lab with him. No matter what conditions I tried, I couldn't get a clean image. Then suddenly, at one moment, a clear image appeared on the screen. That's when he said, "This one." As I looked at it, the words "curse" and "death" appeared on the screen. The synthetic fibers happened to weave together in a pattern that looked exactly like those two kanji characters. Anyone could read them, the words "curse" and "death." But that wasn't all. The student said he experienced many other strange things. When he was alone in the room, someone would tap him on the shoulder, but when he turned around, no one was there. He was also woken up by someone pounding on the window while he was dozing off. Our lab was on the 7th floor. He said he didn't want to do experiments in that room anymore. I told him I couldn't stop the experiment, so I kept it going. But after that night, the student never showed up at the lab again. Skipping classes or refusing to come is common among students, but he remained absent for a long stretch. So I went to check on him at his apartment. No matter how much I called out, there was no answer. I told the building manager and asked him to open the door. When the door swung open, the first thing that hit me was the smell like grilled meat. How could such a smell be coming from there? I found it very strange. I stepped inside, calling the student's name, and what I saw in that room is a memory I can never erase. A bare electric wire was wrapped tightly around his naked upper body. He committed suicide by electrocution. He used a timer to apply the current, and the places where his skin touched the wire were completely burnt. That's where the smell of roasting came from. I felt sick and couldn't hold back vomiting, but when I looked more closely at his upper body, I felt dread seize me. Clear as day, I saw the words "curse" and "death" formed on the skin of his hands and body. Have you ever heard of cursed dolls? This is a story about a curse. Because of work, I often got sent to various places, moving here and there. This story happened when I was transferred to a place called Doki in Yamaguchi Prefecture. Here's how it began. At the time, there was a cheap rental house available, so I decided to rent it for a while. The catch was it was deep in the mountains, a very old, huge house, standing alone amid the trees. About a month after moving in, my daughter found a strange box out in the yard. What's odd was that on the very first holiday after we moved in, I had thoroughly cleaned both inside the house and the yard, and I never saw that box then. I'm sure about this because that box was hard to miss. It was peculiar, distinct. Now, I'm not someone who's sensitive to the supernatural at all, but that box, it gave me a very strong, uneasy feeling. Something about it just felt wrong, like it carried bad luck or something worse. If only I'd made the right choice then, maybe I could have avoided what followed. From a practical, everyday perspective, things you don't need have only two fates: burn them or throw them away. So I chose to burn that ominous box. A few days after I destroyed it, terrible things started happening. One of my friends had a car accident. The car caught fire. When they brought him to the hospital, he was burned all over and had already stopped breathing. Then, a few days later, another friend of mine had a fire at his house. The flames spread to his clothes, seriously burning his right arm and right side of his face. I visited my hospitalized friend and heard about what happened. He told me that a few days before the accident he had dreamed that his body was burning to ash. I'm not superstitious by nature, but at that moment I couldn't help but think, could it have been because of that box? I ran straight home and checked the pit where it burned the trash in the yard. The box was completely burned. When I reached toward it, a sudden chill ran through my body. I opened the box. Inside were 3 dolls, Japanese traditional female dolls in kimono. One was completely burned black, another was half-minus destroyed by fire, and the last one had only a little scorch on its clothes. But the doll itself was intact. I picked up one doll. The half-minus burned one had a tattered kimono, and then suddenly slipped from my hands to the ground. When I looked at the back of that doll, I was so shocked I fell to the floor. On the back was written the name of my hospitalized friend. The fully charred doll's name was completely unreadable, and on the doll that was burned was written my name. At that moment, I started to understand. How could such an impossible thing exist? Who had done this and why target us? I don't share any close connections with those two friends. I can't remember anyone holding a grudge against me or anyone I didn't get along with. Why did such a thing exist in this house? Had someone who hated me lived here before? I don't know anyone in my memories who lived in Yamaguchi Prefecture. This made everything even more confusing. After all of this, I immediately moved out of that house. As for the dolls, I took them to a temple for safekeeping. I haven't forgotten what the temple people told me back then. They said they had originally planned to properly enshrine the dolls, but found they couldn't, because the grudges clinging to those dolls, those spirits, weren't of this world. They didn't belong to humans. Back in my university days, I had a good friend named Kono. Kono was perfect in almost every way: great grades, good looks, charming personality. Contrast that with me: dull, ugly, stubborn. I never understood why Kono was so friendly to me. It was a real mystery. A guy like Kono would usually have a girlfriend, or be part of some super-minus popular group. But somehow, he always stuck with me. One day, I joked, "You're so handsome, you should hang out with the popular crowd, not be a lone wolf." He looked almost angry as he said, "Only when I'm with you do I feel safe." Honestly, I didn't get what he meant. Kono and I met through a club studying mysticism, the supernatural, and esoterica. But that club had basically turned into a drinking and gaming party, so the two of us often did our own thing. We'd meet at each other's places and talk late into nights about strange occurrences. Usually, I was the one sharing half-meanest formed theories about the paranormal, or telling stories about exploring haunted places, and Connor would listen eagerly to all my weird tales. One day, just like usual, while we were doing this, I discovered something shocking at Conno's house. That day, Conno went to the convenience store to buy cigarettes. I was alone in his apartment. The convenience store was pretty far, and waiting for Conno to come back, I started getting restless. So I looked around the room, thinking I should have just gone with him. I took in the state of the place. This guy had nothing. No TV, no couch, no games, no manga, just a table, the cushion I was sitting on, a chair Conno used, a laptop, and a bookshelf crammed with books. It looked kind of pathetic. I wandered around, thinking about how empty his room really was. Then I reached for a notebook on the desk next to the computer. It had shopping lists and appliance model numbers written in it, probably for keeping track of expenses. I flipped through it quickly. Only the first few pages had anything on them. The rest were blank. But when I got to the middle, there was one page covered in writing. I stopped, wondering what this was, and looked closer. That's when I froze, and felt a chill run through me. There was a name written at the top, and after it, filling the entire page, die. Die. Die soon. Die quickly. Hurry up and die. Then there were Buddhist sutras in kanji I didn't really understand, written densely across the whole page. The next few pages were the same, but what shocked me most was the name. It was Conno. I felt like I'd seen something I shouldn't have. I quickly put the notebook back where I found it and pretended to be asleep until Conno came home. When he got back, he seemed completely normal. After he woke me up, I noticed the notebook was gone. He must have put it away somewhere else. Conno smiled and asked me, "Were you sleeping the whole time? You didn't peek at my computer or anything, did you?" I joked back. "Peek at what?" "Your secret vegetable stash." "I was sleeping the whole time. Your place has nothing in it." "Boring as hell." Conno laughed and smoked his cigarette. In the days that followed, nothing about him seemed different. We kept doing what we always did, visiting each other's rooms, working lazily on stories for our supernatural independent group, eating and drinking together. But 6 months later, right at the start of summer break, Conno died. He died of cardiac arrest. I was the one who found him. That day, we'd agreed to meet up at his apartment, but I couldn't reach him no matter what I tried. He didn't answer the doorbell either. I had no choice but to use the spare key we'd exchanged and open his door. I stepped inside. There was a pair of shoes in the entryway. He was home, but no matter how much I called out, no one answered. I walked into that empty room and saw Conno sitting in his chair, looking like he'd fallen asleep. When I got closer, I realized he'd stopped breathing. The moment I understood he was dead, I froze. Then, I broke down crying. After I calmed down, I called the landlord, the police, and an ambulance. I felt like I'd lost everything. My memory of what happened after that is hazy. When Conno's family asked me if I knew whether he had any private belongings like a diary or social media accounts, I had a vague feeling that maybe Conno had ended his own life. I felt like he'd cursed himself. Thinking back, he'd always loved talking about curses and strange religions,